Welcome to the State Bar of Texas podcast, your monthly source for conversations and curated content to improve your law practice. With your host, Rocky Dhir.
Hello and welcome to the State Bar of Texas podcast, recorded from the annual meeting in Austin, Texas. This is Rocky Dhir, and I'm the host for today's show, which is being sponsored by LawPay. Trusted by more than 35,000 law firms to accept legal payments online, it's the only payment solution offered as a member benefit by the State Bar of Texas. Joining me now, I have Larry Gibbs. Welcome to the show, Larry.
Thanks, Rocky.
Before we get started, I know you've been talking today about, and I'm going to read the title because this is quite an earful and quite a mouthful. The United States of America, our national debt, our annual deficits, and the increasing risks they pose. What can be done about them? That sounds like a heck of a topic. Before we get into that, tell us about yourself. Tell us about your background and what you do.
I'm a Texan, transplanted from Kansas originally, but grew up in Dallas, Texas. Went to the University of Texas School of Law here in Austin. Lived in Corpus Christi for 11 years, back to Dallas for 10 years. Currently living in Sarasota, Florida.
Now, you were the IRS commissioner.
I was indeed.
For a time. When was that? And obviously you were living in D.C. You didn't get to be a Texan then.
I moved from Dallas to D.C. And was an appointee for President Ronald Reagan from 1986 to 1989.
I assume you were happy to leave D.C. and to come back to the South.
Sarasota looks great. It really does. It's a good way to leave D.C. if you have to leave D.C.
It's a good place to go. You know, I'm always partial to Texas personally. I love it here. I don't ever want to move away. But
we fly the Texas flag from our dock in Sarasota Bay.
Is that legal to do in Florida?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. So look, Larry, let's talk for a second about the national debt. And I guess reading the title, it sounds like now when I look at my credit card statement, I can say to myself, at least I'm not the United States of America. We've got a big debt problem. Tell us a little bit about this.
It's huge and it's growing. $22 trillion.
That's our national debt.
That's our national debt.
Okay.
And it's growing daily. Within 3 years, the Congressional Budget Office, which is highly respected, nonpartisan, is predicting that we will add $1 trillion a year. That's trillion with a T, a year because of our deficits to the $22 trillion we presently have. So it's exploding, has been for 10 years.
Okay, so let's maybe try to break this down, because I think a lot of people, myself included, you know, when we hear about the national debt and then we hear about deficits, I think maybe we conflate those two terms and we don't necessarily know the difference. But I understand there is a difference. So talk to us about budgetary deficits versus the national debt and what that means.
Be glad to. Each year, the United States operates on a budget.
Sure.
The entire federal government. And what an annual deficit is means that we are paying out more than we are taking in revenue and other receipts. And what that means is that we are spending more than we have. And as I said, the projection is that within the next 2 or 3 years, that's projected to go to $1 trillion a year, overspending more than we are taking in.
So that means per year, we're spending $1 trillion more than we actually take in as a government.
That is correct.
So obviously somehow the country is functioning, because I know for most of us as individuals, when we think that my expenses exceed my income, that means at some point you declare bankruptcy or you try to find ways to pay off that debt, or you're just carrying a debt load forever that you're trying to service. How is the United States as an entity paying for this debt? I mean, obviously we're carrying it and things are functioning. So how are we financing all this debt that we're carrying?
We're financing it largely by borrowing from other countries.
Okay.
They are lending us money, and instead of using our own money or generating money ourselves, we are borrowing literally from others to pay for the way we operate.
So does that mean these other countries have surpluses, or are they also running debts and they're just lending to us? And
Both.
It turns in, okay.
Both.
Okay, so we hear a lot about China, right? That we owe a lot of debt to China. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I mean,
yes.
How is that debt structured, and what happens if China decides to call in that debt?
Well, the debt is on fixed maturities. China can't call it. We could call it, but we don't. We continue. We roll it over. We pay interest, and as interest increases, then we obviously have to pay more.
Pay more, sure.
China is one of the major lenders to us, although they have been reducing the amount that they are willing to lend us over the last several years. But they still lend us a substantial amount of money. So far, we've been able to make payments on time to China as well as our other creditors. If we ever stop doing that, then the poster child for countries that can't pay their debts is Greece.
So you think that could happen to us? That can happen to the United States?
There is now a projection, a computer program by an economist at Wharton by the name of Smetters. And his projection is that within 25 years, the United States will default on its federal debt.
Now, when you look at a country like Greece, and you look at a major military power like the United States, and obviously it's the dollar it's the petrodollar. There's a lot of world currencies are tied to the U.S. dollar. What happens if the United States defaults? Is it the same thing that happens to Greece, or do we get special treatment by dint of being such a big, large
Right now, the United
market?
States is the world's reserve currency. Other states basically trade in our currency.
Sure.
So long as we're the world's reserve currency, most economists feel that we will be able to weather the storm. The problem is that we can't depend on being the world's reserve currency.
How does that change?
It changes when countries are no longer willing to lend to us and would prefer to use a currency of another country. When we start having problems borrowing, even before we default, if another country's currency is recognized as being stronger, we've got a problem. Indeed, business right now, often long-term finances not in United States denominated currency. They use a basket of currencies. It gives them a hedge against the declining value of the dollar and ultimately a hedge against the possibility that we would default on our debt one day.
I guess as a layperson who doesn't deal with taxation and debts and deficits every day, it sounds like the U.S. we're still the world's largest economy by far. If you look at the way, just as a market, everybody still wants to do business with us and they want to do business here. So if people start using a different currency, how does that equation change? What does it mean for us on the ground, for those of us that are citizens? Over
time, it basically is going to mean that there will be things that we take for granted now. Let me give you an example of the types of things that will start occurring. Today, we take for granted that if we live in a state or in a locality that has a natural disaster, that the federal government will step in and help with that. The Congress just passed a natural disaster bill, and the president has signed it. It took longer this year, and it was more difficult this year to get that legislation passed. And there are some that are beginning to ask, how long is the federal government going to be able to do that? What I'm saying is we will begin, unless we start addressing our debt and deficits, finding a way to deal with our entitlements, Social Security, Medicare, other welfare programs, finding ways to reduce those costs. We are going to begin to see signs of fiscal stress in our government where the federal government won't be able to pay the things that they've been paying in the past. That's when we will begin to see the difficulties that can snowball. For example, if interest rates go up, for example, if other countries decide to stop lending to us and so forth, that's where we could get into trouble. It's not a here and now problem, but as I say, there is at least one computer program out there that says we've got 25 years. And this problem we've known about for 30 years. We've known this was going to happen to us for 30 years. That's how I got interested in it 30 years ago, because our politicians, bipartisan on both parties, were saying we need to do something about this problem 30 years ago.
If you had to predict, if we do nothing and just keep things going the way they are, how long before
I've asked that question over and over and over again to politicians and to economists. I finally have an economist who is willing to say, well, I have a computer program that shows 25 years.
25 years.
25 years.
So that's in the lifetimes of many of us. That's on our doorstep.
Well, and that's a projection. The point is that because we have been adding to our entitlements, our Social Security, our Medicare, and in particular our other socioeconomic programs that have been run through the government and run through the tax system, spending programs. This is a snowball that is going downhill, and it's getting larger and larger and larger.
Wow. I could talk to you about this all day long, but last question for now. Hopefully we can have you back on the podcast and talk about this more deeply. But last question for now is, and this goes back to the title of your talk, what can be done about this?
What I'm suggesting is that people begin to start educating themselves about our escalating national debt, annual deficits, and other spending programs. That's the first step. Next step is start contacting your politicians. Tell them your concern. Start asking them hard questions. How big is our national debt? And not only our entitlements, but also our other spending programs. How big are they? Tell us what size of debt we can have where we won't have this risk of default. How big does the debt have to get before it could get out of control? If it does get out of control, what happens? Are we like Greece? What does that mean for me as an individual? What does it mean for my family? Start pressing our elected officials. That actually could bring us all back together instead of a divided country if we realize the dangers to all of us across the political spectrum. It could be unifying, and we could support our elected officials. And I frankly remain optimistic that if we do that, we can find a way to deal with our fiscal problems. And that means that we could actually find a way to unite once we realize the ramifications to all of us if we don't start doing something about this problem.
Wow. Big issues. This is going to be something we chew on for a while, but it does look like we've reached the end of our program. I want to thank Larry Gibbs for joining us today. Thank you, Larry.
Thank you, Rocky.
If our listeners have questions or wish to follow up with you, how do they reach out to you? What's the best way?
lgibbs@milchev.com.
That's your law firm email address.
That's my email address. If you write me, I will be glad to respond and provide the information that I have to help you begin educating yourself.
That's tremendous. Well, that is all the time we have for this episode of the State Bar of Texas podcast, brought to you by LawPay. Thank you again, LawPay. We love you. Also, thank you to our listeners for tuning in. If you like what you heard, please rate us and review us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcasting app. I'm Rocky Dhir. Until next time, thanks for listening.
If you'd like more information about today's show, please visit LegalTalkNetwork.com. Go to TexasBar.com/podcasts, subscribe via Apple Podcasts and RSS. Find both the State Bar of Texas and Legal Talk Network on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn, or download the free app from Legal Talk Network in Google Play and iTunes. The views expressed by the participants of this program are their own and do not represent the views of, nor are they endorsed by, the State Bar of Texas, Legal Talk Network, or their respective officers, directors, employees, agents, representatives, shareholders, or subsidiaries. None of the content should be considered legal advice. As always, consult a lawyer.